Well, good morning. You know, the weather was very decent in North Dakota when I left yesterday. The fields were white with snow geese. Thousands, I guess you even go maybe millions of them. It's incredible. We happen to be on the flyway, so I'm happy to see them come in the spring because you know what? Good weather is coming. When they go in the fall, you know time is over. They're a little late this year, which encouraged me because we've had a very nice fall over there. I had finally completed my last requirement for dental school. I turned in my sign-out sheet, picked up my diploma, and I immediately left Loma Linda, California. I was out of there. I drove over 2,000 miles, eager yet apprehensive to start my dental career at White Earth Indian Reservation. I can still remember arriving at 9 p.m. in Detroit Lakes, January 7th, 1979. The windows on my International Scout were frosting over. The heater wasn't working too well. And so my wife, Joanne, zipped our 3-month-old daughter inside her down jacket. It was the first time in my life I'd ever experienced minus 30 degrees. I have acclimated since then. I gave the government 2 years of my life, and then I started my own dental practice in Harvey, North Dakota. I have been there ever since. In 2006, though, I became adventurous and joined the U.S. Air Force, and this time I traveled 6,000 miles to Ramstein, Germany. So while we were over there one Thanksgiving, Joanne and I decided to go to Berlin. And upon hearing that, a friend of mine said, well, you must go to the Pergamon Museum and see the Ishtar Gate. Anybody know what the Ishtar Gate is? Thank you. I didn't. So I went quickly to the computer, did a little searching, and discovered that it was one of the main gates to the city of Babylon. And when I saw the Ishtar Gate, I thought to myself, how many times do you imagine Daniel walked in and out of this gate? So consider this. Politics is full of mystery and intrigue. Politics has strange bedfellows. There's nothing like having friends in high places with low morals. Such is the case today and 2,500 years ago. As we walk through the portals of time, history reveals kingdoms and countries that dominated their part of the world and enjoyed a culture of corruption. As we say, truth is stranger than fiction. You just can't make this stuff up. So anybody like history? Thank you. So you know that those who don't know history are bound to repeat it. Thank you. Let's go back 2,500 years and just see what the political climate was when Daniel was taken to Babylon. If we read the first chapter of Daniel, it simply says that Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to Jerusalem and takes Daniel and his 3 buddies to Babylon. That is purely very simplistic. So let's see what really happened. And to do that, we're going to go back with a little quick history lesson. When Solomon died in 931 BC, the kingdom of Israel was splitted. The top northern tribes, 8 of them, let's see, better look back at my notes here. The top 10 northern tribes separated and they formed the country of Israel. They still kept that name. The southern 2 became Judah. And during the next 209 years, the northern kingdom of Israel continued to worship in idolatry until God used as his form of justice the Assyrians to issue judgment. And as a result, we have a group called the Samaritans. They were a mixed race resulting from the intermarriage of the poor residents of the northern kingdom with the settlers that the Assyrians brought in from their country. The Jews in Judea hated the Samaritans because they worshipped a corrupted form of Judaism. So while this is going on, the southern kingdom is granted another 134 years. But guess what? They're still living in spiritual adultery, and so Nebuchadnezzar sinned to issue judgment. All this time, God has been saying or trying to get the attention by asking them to change. He has sent the prophets Jeremiah, Obadiah, Joel, Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, Micah, Nahum, Zephaniah, Habakkuk, to warn the people of Israel. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of warnings. But some things never change. And so in Jeremiah 25, verses 8 to 12, it says, "Because you didn't listen to the Lord, this is what he says. I will send for the armies to the north and for my servant Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, to come against Judah and her neighbors and devastate their land, leaving their cities in ruin. I will silence the shouts of joy and gladness, the happy voices of the bride and bridegroom, the sound of the millstones grinding out rich wheat, and I will put out the light of the light burning lamps. Judah and her neighbors will be devastated and will come under the control of the king of Babylon for 70 years. And after the 70 years are completed, I will also have to discipline Babylon and its people for their sins. I will destroy their country, and the city of Babylon will never be rebuilt." Do you know a man by the name of Saddam Hussein? Do you know what he was doing before he got captured? He was trying to rebuild Babylon. I find it quite interesting. As I'm going through here, I'm discovering the interrelationship between Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, that they were contemporaries, living at the same time. So I doubt seriously that Nebuchadnezzar thought he was doing anything for God when he came to capture Jerusalem. At that time, there were two major powers, of course, Babylon and Egypt. Babylon decides to attack Assyria. Egypt is concerned about the new threat, so it moves northward to support Assyria. To get there, though, they have to go through Judah. King Josiah attempts to block the Egyptian forces and is mortally wounded in the Battle of Megiddo. 3 months later, after the battle, then Josiah's younger son, Jehoahaz, is put on the throne of his father. 3 months later, the Egyptians return from the north, and they don't like what they see happening, and so they dethrone Jehoahaz and put his older brother, Jehoiakim, in power. Now, Jehoiakim changes allegiance to avoid the destruction of Jerusalem. He pays tribute from the treasury, donates some of the temple artifacts, and some of the royal family and nobility are taken as trophies, including Daniel and his 3 friends. Babylon then proceeds into Egypt, but fails to capture it. And so after 3 years, Jehoiakim switches allegiance back to Egypt and stops paying the tribute to Babylon. Not a brilliant thing to do, because Nebuchadnezzar comes back, lays siege to Jerusalem a second time. Jehoiakim dies, Jerusalem falls in 3 months, and Nebuchadnezzar now puts Zedekiah on the throne, who is Jehoiakim's brother, on the throne, and makes him swear an oath of allegiance. So we have Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah are all sons of Josiah. Does it get a little complicated? And as a result, Nebuchadnezzar takes more treasure from Solomon's temple, and this time 10,000 of the leading men of Judah are taken to Babylon. The national leadership in Jerusalem just still don't get it, and they continue their wicked ways until Nebuchadnezzar comes back a third time. And this time he builds a siege wall around the city, which is a very common practice or tactic when you want to take down a fortified wall city. A siege will prevent all business and trade from entering and leaving, and to eventually just starve the people out. The siege lasts a year and a half because Nebuchadnezzar is watching over his shoulder at Egypt, because he's not sure if they're going to come and rescue the people in Jerusalem. Sieges are not pretty or humane, as anything that moves eventually becomes food. So in Jeremiah 8, we see a situation that's not looking very good, and so the king calls Jeremiah for advice. And Jeremiah tells the king, "If I tell you the truth, you will kill me. And if I give you advice, you won't listen to me." Then Zedekiah took this oath. "As surely as the Lord lives, who has given us life, I will not kill you, nor will I hand you over to those who are seeking your life." So I said to him, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. If you surrender to the officers of Nebuchadnezzar, your life will be spared. This city will not be burned to the ground, and your family will not be handed over to the Babylonians to be killed. But if you don't surrender, this city will be burned to the ground, and you will not be able to escape." Well, he got his advice. The end is in sight, and so as the Babylonians are breaching the walls and coming in, what does Zedekiah do? Out the back door he goes. Now, the Babylonians were not known to be as cruel as the Assyrians, but they still had experts in their way of creating cruelty. Zedekiah was forced to watch his sons be executed, and then his eyes were gouged out, and spent the rest of his life in darkness. He was put in bronze shackles and led 700 miles to Babylon, where he died in prison. So the question is, the reason I use Isaiah, because that was a different prophet this morning, he had predicted the fall and how it was going to happen. Jeremiah tells him flat out, if you don't surrender, this is what's going to happen. And it happened. Solomon's great temple is now in ruins. It will stay that way until it was rebuilt by the returning exiles in the day of Ezra. The Talmud declares that when the Babylonians entered the temple, they had a 2-day party. They desecrated it, and when they were done, they burned it down. The walls of Jerusalem, the physical security of the city, were destroyed, and Jerusalem was no longer a place of safety or security. And the walls would remain that way until the days of Nehemiah. This was the land God gave to his people, the tribes of Israel. They had possessed this land for some 860 years. They took it by faith and obedience, but they lost it through idolatry and sin. In Chronicles, it tells us the very reason for the exile. They mocked the messengers of God and despised his words and misused his prophets until the wrath of the Lord arose against his people, until there was no remedy. And so, as I learned, we had 3 visits from Nebuchadnezzar. The first group of captives that were taken away to Babylon included the prophet Daniel. 8 years later, 10,000 captives, including the prophet Ezekiel, followed. And finally, when the city of Jerusalem fell in 586 BC, the final captives that were led away to the river by Babylon. But not all the Jews went there. We had another group of Jews that went to Egypt because of the horrible conditions that were left in Judah. And with them, the prophet Jeremiah went. And as a result, the kingdom of Judah is no more, and the lineage of the monarchy has come to an end. But let's go back and try to imagine Daniel's emotions and amazement as he came to Babylon. As they're marching these people in, I don't know if there was an elevated area, if it was flat, but eventually you see a glimpse on the horizon. And what he sees is something astonishing. The city of Babylon is formed in a square, 14 miles on each side, or a circumference of 56 miles. The brick walls, by some accounts, were 75 to 100 feet high, 25 feet thick, with a second wall 75 feet behind it. And in that second wall, the foundation went down 35 feet below ground. There are 250 towers, or 60 towers on a side. A wide, deep moat encircled the city. And as we know, the Euphrates River flowed through the middle of the city. There were ferry boats traveling on it. There was a bridge a half-mile long with increments of drawbridges along the way. Of course, we're familiar with the famous Hanging Gardens. And there are 8 massive gates that lead to the inner city and 100 bronze gates. The streets are paved with stone slabs 3 feet square. 53 temples, including the great temple of Marduk. 180 altars to Ishtar. Nebuchadnezzar's palace was considered to be the most magnificent building ever erected on earth. There are 3 primary main gods in Babylon, which I want you to remember. No quiz, but please remember them. Marduk, he was the main god associated with water, vegetation, judgment, and magic, and was considered the patron god of Babylon. We have Adad, the god of storms, also a supreme power. And we have Ishtar, the goddess of fertility, love, and war. The Ishtar Gate was one of the 8 fortified gates of the inner city of Babylon. It was one of the most impressive monuments rediscovered in the ancient Near East. And how it was discovered, in the early 1900s, there was a group of archaeologists that went there from Germany. Over 16, 17 years, they did excavating, recaptured a lot of the bricks and the reliefs, and I'll show you some pictures here in a minute. Took them back to Germany and reconstructed the Ishtar Gate and the processional hall. The Ishtar Gate was decorated with glazed brick reliefs of lions, dragons, and young bulls. Its reliefs of dragons and bulls symbolize the gods Marduk and Adad. The lion was for Ishtar. The gate itself was a double one with a covered walkway, and through the gatehouse ran a stone and brick paved avenue called the Processional Way. It was the main entrance into Babylon and was the starting point for processions. The Babylonians would assemble in front of it and march through the triumphal arch and proceed to the temple of Marduk. What happens when a triumphant king or general comes back from battle? There's a party. He is a hero, and he is hailed as such. And the captives and all the treasures are paraded before the people of Babylon. The people probably are laughing and jeering as you go by. Maybe you feel a few people spitting on you, ridiculing you. It's a very humiliating experience. The artifacts and treasures from Solomon's temple are placed in the temple to Marduk, which signifies the superiority of the Babylonian gods over Judah. And they are reminded of that. So if we can turn the pictures on, let's do a few of those. This is a map, give you some idea of how they transpired. On the left side, you can see Jerusalem. Just follow the brown path, 700 miles walk. Go to the next one. This is a recreation of the processional way. If you can see in the far end would have been Ishtar's gate. You see the high walls on each side. They are lined. It is a celebration. Okay, next one. In the museum at Pergamon, this is another recreation of the procession way and the Ishtar gate. You can see the chamber that you would walk through. Next one. And these are the brick reliefs and they're still in color. These were not repainted from Babylon's day. You can see how high the walls are. Again, you meet the lions as you come in. That is to give you great concern, that you better be careful. As we all know, the ferociousness of a lion. And as you walk out, you got the impression of you being escorted out and to be careful. The next one, just another piece. That's a 3D dimensional. It's a little raised out, so you get some three-dimensional effect. Next one. Again, that is the Ishtar gate. It's not to scale. They didn't have enough room to put it to the full height, so they just filled the area they had available. But you can see the animals in the corners there. We'll get a closer picture on the next one. The bottom one is the young bull. The second one is what they refer to as a dragon. It's a strange dragon to me. Next picture. There's the close-up of the dragon. And what do you see on the back feet? Claws, okay? Go to the next one. There's a picture of a close-up of the claws. And go to the next one. That's the bull. And that is what's left of the temple to Marduk. It's still there in Babylon. So I'm sure shortly after Daniel arrives at the University of Babylon, he is put to school. What do you suppose his requirements are to get into admission? You know, we have to take ACT tests, or they look at your GPA. If you want to follow along with me, we're going to just start in Daniel and go through the first 3 chapters here real quick. Daniel 1, 3 through 4. Once back, the king ordered Ashpenazar, his palace master, to select from the Jewish captives young men in their teens who were of royal descent to bring them to the palace for training. If they're royal descent, they're half-educated already. They know the pros and cons, the etiquette, and the conduct. They were to be intelligent, handsome, self-disciplined, quick to learn, and graceful in their manners in order to serve in the royal court. Aspenza was also to see to it that they were taught the language and literature of Babylon. So what would be the curriculum? They were enrolled in an indoctrination program designed to transform the exiles into loyal subjects of their new king. And the challenge that Daniel faced was assimilating at the expense of his loyalty to his own God. The subjects Daniel would probably have studied included astrology, study of animal entrails, rites of purification, sacrifice, incantation, exorcism, and other forms of divination and magic. Science, literature, and they had to learn about the Babylonian gods. And that is plural because there were 18 major gods and 93 minor gods. Keep them straight, would you? Mm. And so you can understand that when they came, they said, you have one God? We have 120. How can your one God do what our gods do? Okay. So how many years did it take him to graduate? A year in school. How many years? Sometimes we think it's a long time. If we go to verses 17 through 21, it tells us, after these 4 young men went through their studies, God helped them. He gave them insight and skill in whatever they learned. In addition, he gave Daniel the gift of interpreting visions and dreams. And when the 3 years of training were over, Aspenza, the palace master, took all the young men to Nebuchadnezzar for their oral examinations. Anybody had an oral examination? I detest them. I never had one, but when I was in college, I had to do essays for our tests. You had to he told us ahead of time, here are 6 questions. I will pick 3 on the day of the test, and you write. The king examined each of them and found that Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were ahead of all the others. This so impressed the king that he made them permanent members of his court. As they served the king, no matter what questions the king asked them or what problems he faced, he found them 10 times better and more reliable than any of the fortune tellers and astrologers who served as his advisors. Daniel served in Babylon as a member of the royal court until Cyrus the Persian conquered Babylon. So immediately their skills and talents are recognized and they are put right up and top. So school was 3 years. Who was the valedictorian of the class? That should be easy. Daniel and his 3 buddies. So now I want to look at 3 examples which I call the battle of the gods. In other words, Babylon versus Yahweh. Because so many times as we study Daniel, we look at Daniel and his three partners and we say, man, look at the trials he went through. Look at this. Look at what they overcame. But I think there's in my opinion, when I look, there's also another subject which is profound. And that is, whose God is going to reign? So the first example we found is in chapter 2. And Nebi has a dream, and he's disturbed by the dream. And so what does he do? Get all the smart boys in here. We got a problem. And so he tells his astrologers and all his wise men, I had a dream. It troubles me. Tell me what it is, the meaning of the dream. Well, so sure, no problem. Just tell us the dream. Well, he says, I can't do that, so I want you to do that for me. Are you joking me? No ruler has ever required that of their subjects. Nobody. He doesn't like the answer, so what does he do? Kill him. And Daniel gets the word, and he gets on his knees, and what? He prays. And he rushes into King Nebuchadnezzar, and he says, Lord, Nebi, give me 1 day. Give me 1 day. And so he defers the execution. And he goes and he meets with his friends, and God reveals to him the dream. So let me tell you what the wise men's response was. Verse 10 and 11. The men got scared and said, Your Majesty, there's no one on earth who can do what the king is asking. No ruler, no matter how great and mighty, has ever demanded such a thing from his priests, fortune tellers, and astrologers. What the king wants us to do is impossible. No one can tell someone else what the dream about the dream except the gods, and they don't live with us. Very profound. And what is Daniel's response when he comes back? In verse 27 and 28. Then Daniel answered, Your Majesty, there is no philosopher, astrologer, fortune teller, or priest who claims to communicate with the dead who can do what the king is asking. But there is a God in heaven who can reveal anything and explain any mysteries which trouble the king. It was this God, Your Majesty, who showed you the future. So first, let me tell you your dream and the vision you had while you were asleep. That way you can depend on the interpretation. And what is Nebuchadnezzar's response? We find that in verses 46 to 49. Then Nebuchadnezzar got up from his throne and bowed low before Daniel. Now, can you imagine that? The king bows to the subject. Daniel, to show his respect for what he had done, he also ordered incense and sacrifices to be offered to the God of heaven out of thankfulness for Daniel. The king said to Daniel, It's true that your God is above all gods. Now, what did I hear him say? Because where did the temple artifacts go? They went into the temple to Marduk, Lord over kings, and the only one who can reveal the future. I realize this now because you were the only one who could tell me what I had dreamed and then interpret it for me. Then the king promoted Daniel. He gave him many gifts in recognition of what he had done. He put him in charge of the affairs of the city and of the greater Babylonian province, and also made him president of all the king's advisors. At Daniel's request, Nebuchadnezzar appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as Daniel's assistants. They helped him with the affairs of the province, while Daniel took care of the affairs of the city itself, staying close to the king and working with his advisors. Daniel's God now has superiority and credibility, and Daniel and his friends have advanced to the top of the food chain. And I'm guessing, can you imagine what the local boys are thinking? Yeah. So chalk went up for God. Chapter 3, verse 1. During the next 20 years, Nebuchadnezzar gradually changed. One day, he decided to have a statue built to look like the one he had seen in his dream, but he had it made totally of gold to show that the prophecy was an error and that his kingdom would last. It was about 100 feet high, 10 feet wide. He had it set up on the flat plains of Dura in the province of Babylon. So let's see how this turns out. We all know the story. Come out, we got a special government meeting today, and when the horns sound, everybody bows down, correct? Everybody. Wrong. 3 men do not do that. And so they're brought before the king, and this is what they tell him. It's true that we didn't bow to and worship before the golden statue that you have set up. But if that's considered being disloyal to Babylon, what can we say? Our God, whom we serve, is able to defend us if he chooses to do so. But if not, Your Majesty can be sure that we will not worship the Babylonian gods, nor bow and worship before the golden image. Then the king became furious, raging mad. His face turned red with anger as he looked at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Immediately he ordered his men to make one of the blazing furnaces 7 times hotter. Now I like how he picked a prophetic number. 7 times hotter. And when it was hot enough, the king ordered the strongest guards to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego hand and foot and throw them into the furnace. And so the guards tied them up and threw them fully dressed with their official robes. And I think that's interesting because the other thing which is interesting is that he did give them a second chance. He liked these guys. They were his top echelon. But when you defy the king, you know what happens. Because the king in his rage had ordered the furnace to be made 7 times hotter, the clothes of the guards who threw the 3 Hebrews into the furnace caught fire, and the guards burned to death. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fell down into the blazing furnace, tied hand and foot. And as the king was watching from a safe distance, suddenly he jumped to his feet, and he's staring at the blazing furnace. And he calls his advisors. Tell me, didn't we just tie up 3 men? Yes, we did, your majesty. Then how is it? Count them. I see 4 men in there. All of them were untied and walking around in the fire. And the 4th one looks like the Son of God they told me about. Nebuchadnezzar came as close to the opening of the furnace as he could, and he called to the 3 Hebrews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out of there. I thought about that. Maybe I'm a little obnoxious, but I would have said, you know what, Nebby? You put us in here, you come in. We're doing fine. Because imagine the privilege that they were experiencing. The salvation of God. But they came out, and the Son of God disappeared. And then the king's counselors, the local princes, governors, commissioners, and all of the other officials crowded around them to see and feel the 3 Hebrews who had been thrown into the blazing furnace and had walked out unharmed. Their bodies weren't burned, their hair wasn't singed, and there wasn't even the smell of smoke on their clothes. Incredible. And then Nebuchadnezzar said, Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent someone to rescue his servants because they put their trust in him. They were so loyal to him that they disobeyed my orders and risked their lives, rather than bowing in worship before any god except their own. Therefore, I make this decree. Anyone who speaks disrespectfully of the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, no matter what people, nations, or language, or group they come from, will be torn to pieces, limb from limb, and their house will be made into a public toilet. There is no other God who can save his people like the God of the Hebrews. Now, I'm not sure the Hebrews really wanted that type of punishment done. You know, that's kind of forced coercion, which we're not really supportive of. And then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and put them in complete charge of the province of Babylon. Round 2 goes to the God of Israel. And my question is, are you getting the picture yet, Nebby? So let's go to chapter 4. He has another dream. He dreams about a tree being cut down and a brass ring put around it. During the first half of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had an experience that truly convinced him that the God of the Hebrews was the true God. He sent a message to all nations, the language groups in his kingdom, and to all the countries he had conquered. And this was his message: peace to all of you. I thought it would be good for you to know about the miracles and the other wonderful things that God of heaven has recently done for me. Now, well, this is a good evangelistic sermon, isn't it? How great and wonderful God is. How powerful and redemptive are his miracles. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and he will rule forever. I could see a lot of conversions coming. Let me digress for a minute. Because when we lived in Germany, we loved traveling. And as you come to these little villages, what is the most prominent building that's exhibited in any little village? The church. It has the highest place of prominence. And the first thing we did was we looked at the steeple of the church. Why would you look at the church steeple? To see if there was a rooster on there. Did the steeple have a rooster on the cross or didn't it? Because if it had a rooster, it was a Catholic church. If it didn't, it was a Protestant church. And you'll see that each village is different. And what happened in medieval times was, if the ruler or emperor had a conversion, so did all his subjects. So one day you're Catholic, the next day you're Protestant. And those segments are still true today. You have pockets of Catholics, pockets of Protestants all around. Okay. I lost my spot. How great and wonderful God is. How powerful and redemptive are his miracles. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and he will rule forever. A little over 7 years ago, while I, Nebuchadnezzar, was resting in the palace, I thought about everything I had done for Babylon and was feeling quite proud of myself. Remember that pride? And eventually, Daniel comes and has a little talk with him. In verse 24 it says, "This is the decision, Your Majesty, was made by the Most High God. Your reason will be taken from you, and you will be driven away from human society to live with animals. You will eat grass like an ox, sleep in the field. The morning dew will fall on you for 7 years," another prophetic number, "until you have learned that God is in control of all human affairs and that he can give your kingdom to whomever he wants. But since the holy watcher said to the angel to leave the stump and its root in the ground, your kingdom will be restored to you. However, this is only after you have accepted God's sovereignty. This is the dream and its meaning. And now, Your Majesty, may my personal advice be acceptable to you. I suggest that you atone for your sins by doing what is right, and for your iniquities by showing mercy to those who are weak and taking care of those who are poor. This change on your part will defer the sentence and may even cancel it altogether." After Belshazzar, Daniel, interpreted the dream, this is what happened to me, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. About a year later, as I was strolling in the rooftop of my palace, I looked out over the city and said to myself, "What a beautiful sight. I'm the one who built this magnificent city. I'm the one who put this nation on its feet and made it into a great empire." And it was true, it was a great empire. It was my intelligence and power that did all this, no one else's. This great Babylon will stand as a monument to me forever. I had scarcely gotten the words out of my mouth when a voice from heaven said, "King Nebuchadnezzar, your kingdom has been taken from you. Your reason will be taken from you, and you will be driven from society to live with the animals out in the field. And for the next 7 years you will eat grass like an ox, until you have learned that the Most High God rules in the affairs of men and can give your kingdom to whomever he wants." Immediately the sentence was fulfilled and my mind was gone. My advisors could tell that my reason was gone, and so they took me away and let me live with the animals out in the field. I ate grass like an ox and slept in the open air. My body got wet with the morning dew. My hair grew long and became so matted with the dirt that it stuck out like eagle's feathers. And my fingernails grew until they looked like the claws of birds. When I saw the Ishtar gate, I didn't know what those animals represented, so I went back and did a little research. Because I remember the story, in junior class. This great king was sent out to the field and turned into an animal. And at all that time I thought, you know what? God is just humiliating him. Punishing him. Yeah, he's punishing him. But then I got to thinking after I learned there are 3 primary gods in Babylon. The one was the wild ox that did what? Eats grass. The other one, the dragon, had claws like eagles. And that's what his fingernails grew out to be. And the third one was the lion, who we all know has a hairy mane. And I said, maybe there's a deeper spiritual lesson here than we think. And this is my perspective. You Babylonians and you Nebi have so much faith in your 3 gods, I'll make you into one. I'll take your 3 gods, and you will eat grass like the ox. And your fingernails will grow like the claws of eagles. And actually, the reverse happened, that God was humiliating their gods. So give strike 3 to God. And that's why I have said, I think there's a deeper lesson here. Obviously, there was a great evangelistic opportunity, and you see what he had decreed many times. And I think he's actually saying to Nebi, who is the real God, Nebi? Who is he? Daniel rose to a position of great power because of his ability to interpret dreams and his visions and of his great piety and faith in the Lord. He was a young man when he went into captivity and died an old man, still in Babylon 70 years later. He lasted through the reign of 5 kings, beginning with Nebuchadnezzar and lasting to the reign of Darius the Persian, to Cyrus the Mede in 534. And even though the Jews returned home after 70 years, he remained until his death. He was God's witness in the palace that ruled the world during his lifetime. And as we know, the end or demise of Babylon, we kind of liken it to the Achilles heel. Because I've told you the security in Babylon. There's no way anybody would have been able to breach that fortress. Except, when we look in Isaiah 44, verse 27, the providence of God who prophesied through Isaiah a century earlier that he would dry the river and open the gates, allowed Cyrus to breach the river gates. Isn't it incredible how he predicted? He told them that Babylon was coming, and he also predicted their demise and exactly how they would do it. We would call that the Achilles heel, the weak point, the kink in your armor. And so if we bring it to today's vernacular, it's frightening to think that America has enemies at our gates looking for our Achilles heel. Do we have one? We're told in prophecy we're going to make it to the end, but I think we're going to see some really earth-shattering things happen. When I was stationed in Ramstein, Germany, first thing I was instructed is, you don't go wandering around on your government computer. In 2006, there was over 800 cyber attacks on government computers each and every day. And if we did deviate, we had the red dog on our screen, which told you, get out. Unless the Lord builds a house, they labor in vain who build it. And unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman keeps awake in vain. That's in Psalms 127, verse 1. So my admonition to you is, may we continually turn to God who loves us and calls us every day. For he is our hope and our salvation. May we seek him daily in worship, asking for his mercy, the knowledge of his will, and the strength to carry it out. Our closing hymn is 249.